Hello everyone, my name is Kata and welcome back to my kingdom. In this video, I am going to be starting work on the suit head. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing here is I am pulling out the fabrics I'm going to use. I actually decided that I was going to go with this darker green for the lining. I realized that I actually didn't really like the lighter green. You'll actually see in previous videos or later on in this video that I actually didn't stay with that same lighter green fabric. That I actually went and found a completely different fabric that I liked way more, and so I'm going to be sticking with this darker emerald type green fabric for the lining of most of the things. I lined the head with this fabric as well as the base of the tail, and I think the inside of the hand paws are going to be lined with this stuff too. So what I'm doing here is I am going through and measuring the head base that I am using. This head base is called an Ed head. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can find one of these. They are really high quality, but they are also pretty expensive. A lot of makers recommend this head, and I recommend this head as well because it is actually far more proportionate to the average adult human-sized head. So a lot of the foam heads that you'll get from like Walmart or something like that, those heads are a lot smaller than actual human heads, and you need to pad them out or else your suit heads will not fit when you wear them. And so what I've done here is I have taken the measurement and I have folded the tape measure in half so that I can get exactly half of whatever measurement I took. I know that I could do math for this, but I do math for so many other things. I'd rather just make it easy and fold the measuring tape in half, and voila, you have your measurement. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the measurement from the top of the head to the bottom of wherever I want the balaclava to go. I get a bunch of extra fabric just to make sure that I have plenty and I don't have to worry about having to figure out how I'm going to make it longer, and I just have plenty to work with. So you see me here, I'm pinning it in place and checking it, slipping it over the dummy's head to make sure that it actually fits, and it does. So what I'm doing is I'm going to pull out my sewing machine and I'm going to sew all the way along the edges of this so that I can just get the two sides connected together. So I have opted to leave the one side folded. So what happens is this is basically one big square that is folded in half, and I'm sewing the edges together so that the front of the balaclava has no seam. By making sure that you have no seam in the front of the balaclava, this helps to make sure that when you are cutting holes for the eyes and the mouth, that you don't wind up accidentally cutting any seams. It also, depending on how you construct the fursuit head, will make it a lot more comfortable on the wearer so that you don't have any seams on the person's face. So what I've gone through and done here is I have put the seams into the corners. So I've sewn all the way into the corners, and then what I'm doing here is I'm testing it onto the dummy so that I can get the rounded edges a bit. These don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have absolutely the perfect curve because everybody's head is going to be shaped a little bit differently. So this doesn't have to be super precise, but I do recommend that you do kind of round out these corners so you don't wind up with bunched up materials where the corners were in this fabric. A lot of people opt to just cut the balaclava into this shape beforehand. That is a valid way of doing it, and you can totally do it that way. I find that this way is a little bit easier because then I don't have to fiddle with the fabric and make sure it's lined up perfectly. I can just go in and sew it, but again, you can do it either way. You have two options when starting a fursuit head. You have a balaclava or no balaclava. So personally, I prefer to start my suit heads with a balaclava. It makes it a little bit easier because then you have something to actually attach the head to as you go. After I'm done sewing it, I do a test fit, and then after my test fit, if it looks good, I go through and trim the extra off of the seam allowance, as well as the corners that I rounded out, so that I don't have any of that bunched up fabric later on. What I'm doing here is I'm going through and reinforcing this entire stitch with a Zig Zag Stitch. So the first thing I did is I tested it on a piece of test fabric to make sure that I got the correct width and length for my zigzag stitch. I always recommend that you do a test run on the fabric that you're going to be doing the zigzag stitch on, just to make sure that your fabric doesn't get caught in the machine, or the zigzag stitch is close enough or far enough apart from itself. Whatever you need to accomplish with this zigzag stitch, make sure that it works good on the fabric that you're doing it on. So another reason why I am zigzag stitching this entire seam is so that I can make sure that the seam doesn't come undone. When the suit is finished, this seam is going to be very difficult to access. So if this seam happens to come undone for some reason, it's going to be very difficult to fix, because you're going to have the neck of the fursuit, the ears, the eyes, you're going to have a bunch of stuff in the way, and it's going to be very difficult to fix this seam. So I heavily reinforce these seams just to make sure they never come undone, so you don't have to worry about it later on in the suit's life. I put it on for another test fit, and it fits perfectly, and that means that my balaclava is finished. I actually wind up putting it off to the side for a while because I don't really need it right this moment. So what I'm doing now is I am starting to test fit these eyeballs that I have. So the base that I have right here is a expanding foam drekkubus base by Dream Vision Creations. Again, I'll leave a link in the description to where you can get your own. I am fitting this foam head blank with these 3D printed eye blanks. There are tons of people out there who do 3D printed eye blanks. These ones are a very specific measurement for me. I gave the person who 3D printed them for me very specific measurements, and I told them the exact shape and the sizes that I wanted. So most people who do 3D printed eye blanks can make them in whatever size and shape you want. So find somebody who does it, and if they do the custom eye sizes, give them whatever shapes you want, give them pictures and stuff, and you'll get your own custom eye blanks. These 3D printed eye blanks are a lot bigger than what the head blank allows. So the head blank's eyes are too small. So what I have to go through and do is cut the holes a bit bigger so that they fit. This really isn't that big of a deal. You just have to go through and trim it larger, and you just keep fitting the eyes into the head until they fit. If for whatever reason, say my eye blanks were smaller than the holes that the blank already had, all you need to do is just take a little bit of extra foam, whatever kind of foam you want to use, and just fill in that space and fit the eyes into the head the way you want them to sit. I actually wound up having to do this way later on because I actually did trim the holes a bit bigger. So I always recommend trimming it a little bit bigger so that they fit, so that you can then put in extra foam to make sure that they're angled correctly and are sitting into the head perfectly. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm starting to fit the head blank to my mannequin. Say you're making this suit for yourself. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put it onto your face over and over and over again until it feels comfortable. I am doing both mannequin test and test on myself so that it will fit on the mannequin and on my head. Because this is a pre-made, I want it to be able to fit more than just me. I want it to fit several other people, and the mannequin head is actually a little bit bigger than my head is. If I make sure that it fits both of us comfortably, then a wider range of people will be able to wear this suit head. But if you were making this as a personal suit, this is not something you need to take into consideration just because this is a suit only made for you. So I'm going through and actually making sure that the bottom jaw fits in the top of the head pretty well. And what I'm doing now is I'm going through and hollowing out the muzzle. So I really have no plans for the muzzle. I'm not going to be putting any kind of fan or anything into it, but hollowing out the muzzle does give me a lot more freedom to add teeth or anything else into the muzzle if I wanted to. And then if the person who purchases the suit wanted a fan, they could add a fan. There is space for a fan in the muzzle if they wanted. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding elastic to this head base. My goal is to make this suit have the possibility of having a moving jaw. Even if it is pretty small, I want the suit to have even a chance of having a moving jaw. I have never made a moving jaw on a foam blank before. I have made it on resin blanks before, but I've never done it on a foam blank. So this is something that is kind of new to me, and I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to go about adding this elastic to this foam blank so that I can get it to work properly. So I've kind of opted to wrapping the elastic all the way around the head. I figured if I wrapped the elastic all the way around the head, there's no way that the elastic could pop off. I'm doing a bunch of test fits to make sure that all of this is going to work before I actually start attaching anything permanently. This is very important when making your own suits, is to constantly be doing test fitting, constantly be trying it on. Personally, this makes me kind of happy when I can put something on and go, oh cool, it's coming together, even if it is just a head blank with some elastic on it, but also it makes sure that you're still on the right track and that your stuff isn't going to be wrong or wonky when you've already kind of finished attaching something. So obviously test fits are very important and I recommend you do them regularly. So what I'm doing here is I have determined how big I want the elastic to be, and instead of just gluing the elastic onto the head, what I'm going to do is, because it is going to be a big ring that goes all the way around basically goes up underneath your chin and up to the top of your head, I want the elastic to be sewn at the top just so that it doesn't come undone with the hot glue. So I'm going to be sewing the elastic into a loop that will go all the way around the head. I've already got that measurement. I've already figured out how big it needs to be by putting it all the way around my head and making sure that it fits. Now I'm going through and reinforcing this elastic to make sure that it doesn't come undone. Once it is all sewn together, I am putting it back onto the suit head so that I can make sure that it is in fact placed correctly and that it is the correct length and size all the way around and it is comfortable to wear. So I did actually find a use for this lime green fabric, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using it to kind of reinforce different parts of the foam head. So because this is foam, the foam has a tendency to rip, and I'm not going to say that, you know, once a suit head is finished that ears are going to get ripped off or anything like that, but I want to make sure that all of the pieces are reinforced properly so that I don't have to worry about that later in the suit's life or later in my construction. So I don't want pieces falling off during me building the suit, because if it isn't secure while I'm building the suit, it's not going to be secure when the suit is finished. So reinforcing your pieces is going to make sure that your suit doesn't have any issues later on. So what I'm doing here is I'm reinforcing the jaw just to make sure that I have kind of like an anchor point to make sure that the bottom jaw is in fact connected to the top jaw by more than just the elastic. You'll actually never see this lime green fabric that I'm using here because everything will become aligned and you won't have to worry about seeing it, and that's why I'm not worried about what color it is. What I'm doing here is I'm pulling out some EVA foam. I'm going to be taking these pieces and I'm going to be placing them on top of the eyes so that I can go ahead and get eyelids made. So I don't want the suit to have these really, really big round eyes, just because personally that's not something I like the way the look of. So what I'm doing is I am making the eyes have a little bit more of a calmer look. My goal is to give this suit a very neutral or relaxed look to the eyes. I don't want the suit to be overly happy, nor do I want the suit to be grumpy. So what I'm doing is I'm giving the suit eyelids to kind of bring the eyes down to a neutral size. Because in real life, somebody who is just sitting there not doing anything, their eyes are pretty much slightly closed and are not completely wide open in these big round spheres. So I kind of want to emulate that with this suit by also giving this suit a more neutral look. What I'm doing is I am pinning this to the head so I can make sure that I have a general shape of what I want the eyelids to look like. Alrighty, so right now I am moving on to painting. So what I'm doing is I'm going to protect my table with some newspaper just so I don't wind up with a bunch of paint all over my white table. And I'm going to actually start painting these eyes. So I have this plastic mesh stuff. I'm using a plastic mesh, not buckram, just because I don't really like buckram. I feel like it's harder to paint, it's harder to work with. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the mesh and I am painting the back of the eyes black first. So the purpose of painting the back of your fursuit eyes black is so that it gives the wearer much easier vision. So what's going to happen is the light is going to come through the eyes, it's going to bounce off their face, and then is going to go back onto the eyes. If the back of the eyes are black, that stuff is not going to reflect as much as if the back of it was, say, white. So if I left it white, it would be a lot harder for the person to see out of. This is something that has been tested and proven, even if you might not understand the science behind it too much. It is tested and proven with lots of fursuit makers. Everybody recommends you paint the back of your eyes black, but a lot of people will paint the back of their eyes black after the front are painted. I don't like doing this. I want to make sure the back of my eyes are painted black first, just to make sure that I don't wind up with any black bleeding through the front of my eyes that are perfect and finished. I don't want to have to risk getting any black paint on the pretty finished front side, so I paint the back of them black first, and then if any of the paint from the front happens to bleed onto the back, it's really not that big of a deal. It's just the back of the eyes. It'll be just fine and it'll still work and function as if they were completely black. So what I'm doing here is I am going through and I'm going to paint these 3D printed eye blanks. This character that I am making, the eye blanks are not white, so I'm going through and making a paint that is the correct color to what the eyes should be, which is this lighter green. So I can be more effective with my time, I went back and forth and flipped between them, and I repainted them, and as I'm waiting on the paint to dry, I'm going through and I'm going to work on the suit head a bit. What I'm doing is I'm taking these eyelids that I've created out of the EVA foam and I am recreating them so that I have a set of eyelids for the other eye. Of course, I need a set for both eyes, so that's what I'm going to be doing here, is making both sets. So all I need to do is just lay the pieces down onto some EVA foam and trace it out and cut it, and then I have a duplicate for the other side. So what I'm doing here is I'm going through and pinning it so I can see what it looks like on both sides. Alright, so now that the paint has gone through and dried a bit, I'm going to go through and put another layer of paint on. It takes several layers just to make sure that I have a nice even coat on the 3D printed eye blanks. It's going to take a ton of layers for the mesh part of the eyes to actually be finished and look good, and make sure that I don't clog up all of the holes by just slathering on a bunch of paint all at one time. What I'm doing here is I am tracing out the new circles and I am starting to mix paint for the base of the eyes so I can go ahead and get started with painting on the base color. The pupil is going to be black, the iris is going to be a dark green, and then the sclera is going to be a light green. So the sclera of your eye is the white part of your eye. The iris is the colored part, so normally it's blue or brown or hazel or green in humans. And then the pupil is the black circle in the middle. And so that is the colors that I'm going to be doing for this character. Going through and lightly laying down this base coat, and I realize there's a bunch of spots that have been covered. So I'm going through and again, poking those little holes out. This is super time consuming and I really hated doing it. If I had been more careful with my painting and say I had layered on the paint a little bit more evenly and a lot lighter, I wouldn't have had to worry about poking all of the holes out. But I made a mistake and just kind of put the paint on too thick and it covered the holes. So the holes need to be uncovered in order for the person who's wearing the suit to be able to actually see. So I have to make sure that most of the holes are not covered. A few of the holes are covered, that's okay. You want to make sure you don't wind up with big blind spots in your suit and can't see out of it. So what I've done is I have taken a few of the clips that I use when clipping the fabric to itself when I'm sewing it, and I have clipped the bottom of this mesh so that it is not laying down on the newspaper, so that it will have both sides be able to dry. This will also allow it to dry a little bit quicker just because there are the holes. It'll be able to have a little bit of airflow through the holes of the mesh. So I am attempting to multitask here, and I am flipping back and forth between painting and working on the eyelids. So what I'm doing here is I am starting to attach the elastic strapping all the way around the head that'll give the moving jaw the ability to actually close when the head is being worn. What I'm doing is I'm going through and making sure that I am putting hot glue down wherever the elastic won't be moving. So right on the jawline, where the bottom jaw attaches to the top of the head, I've left all of that space open and unglued just so that the elastic has enough space to be able to stretch and open as the suit head is being worn, whereas all of the rest of the spaces are being glued down just so that the elastic is attached properly. So what I'm doing here is I am going through and I'm starting to pattern out the ear shape. So what I have done is I have pulled out my reference sheet so that I can get a approximate size for these ears. Just because these ears are so big, I want to make sure that I give them the proper length, and with my ref sheet I have made sure that the ears are to scale to the head. So what I've done is I have measured the head to the ears on the ref sheet, and then what I'm doing is I have measured the head in real life. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale up the ref sheet measurement so that I have the proper size for the ears in real life. This is not the first time I've done this method of measurement. I've done this exact same technique with the tail to make sure that the tail was the proper size as well to the ref sheet. This is a strategy that I use quite often when making fursuits, but of course there are lots of people out there who just choose to kind of eyeball whatever size they want, and that's a-okay too, but personally I want to make sure that it is the correct size. So what I'm doing is I'm using paper to get the correct length as well as the correct shape. Then I don't waste a whole bunch of stuff, so I can look at the paper and go, this is the correct size, or this is the correct shape I want, but I don't really like this or that. So I can go ahead and fiddle with it as much as I want without having to waste a whole bunch of materials. I'm using tape here to actually kind of give it a little bit of structure so that it doesn't just flop over, because paper does tend to be very, very, very weak. So giving it a little bit of tape structure allows it to kind of stick out the way that foam would. So I realized that the base of the ear was not the correct shape, so I'm going through and attaching a little bit more paper so I can redo the base of the ear so that I can give it a different angle. I want the ears to go kind of down and out a bit, not straight out either side, so I would need to change the base shape. I'm going through and putting another layer on my eye blanks as well as the eye mesh. So unfortunately I messed up the previous eye mesh, and for whatever reason it dried and I could not see out of the eye mesh. Not being able to see out of the eye mesh is a really big deal just because that's how you're going to see out of the costume. So I'm going to have to redo these eyes, sadly. But that's okay because I actually wound up doing them even better. So this is me restarting the eye mesh. Of course, I'm just going through and making sure that I have enough eye mesh to actually do the eyes, and I am again repeating it by painting the back of the eyes black again. I realized that the eye mesh that I was using was faulty and did not have the proper holes punched out on the other side where the other eye would be. So what I'm doing here is I have a brand new sheet of mesh here, and I'm going to cut out a new piece. So this is the third attempt at eyeballs. I really want to make sure that the eyeballs are absolutely perfect, so I will redo these things as many times as I need to just to make sure that they are perfect. So what I am doing now is I am going through and adding these straps that are needed to hold the foam base onto your head. I have measured the head blank on both myself as well as the mannequin just to get an idea of what each of us would need for measurement so that I could kind of go with whichever one was either bigger or was the better size. Again, the entire purpose of this is to make sure that the widest range of people are able to wear this head just because it is a pre-made, and I want to make sure that no one is going to be left out of buying this if they really wanted it by the size of it. So this is another reason why I'm not making a bodysuit, and I'm only making these pre-made parts that pretty much anybody can wear. So this is me going through and cutting out the strap in the foam. I'm going to test fit it before I start gluing anything down. So I'm going through and checking my eyes again, just waiting on the hot glue of the strap to cure. This is another thing that I need to reinforce. So what I've done is I've pulled out my fabric and I'm cutting out pieces of fabric that I can go ahead and reinforce these glue seams so that this foam strap doesn't wind up getting ripped off for any reason. This doesn't seem like a whole lot, but this fabric really does help because instead of having that one little teeny tiny thing of glue, you have a larger section of fabric that basically kind of reinforces it over a larger area. It's kind of like wearing snowshoes in the snow instead of just regular shoes. It kind of spreads out the weight, so you don't have to worry about it having any issues. I realized that this foam strap is actually a little bit too big, so I'm going to shorten it by reattaching it together with hot glue. Again, this is another thing that I'm going to reinforce with some fabric. So what I've done here is I have done a test fit for the ear and kind of stepped back and looked at it a bit. I'm not sure if I like it in its current position, so I've taken it off so I can work on a different part of the suit. I'm going through and finishing up the reinforced part of where I had to fix this strap to make it a little bit smaller. Now I'm going to be going through and attaching the top strap to the back strap. This is another thing that I'm going to be reinforcing again. I have left the strap on the top of the head long so that it can go and it can continue kind of down the forehead of the foam base, just so that I don't have to reinforce it with fabric because it will have enough surface area on its own for the glue to attach to. Because this head is being made for people who have slightly larger heads than mine, I've taken some pieces of foam and I've put it underneath my chin and on the back of my head, just so that the jaw would move comfortably with my head. So whoever purchases this head from me is going to wind up getting these pieces of foam that they can then insert themselves to wherever it is comfortable for them, so that they can also have a moving jaw with this suit. Now I'm doing some test fits with the painted eye blanks as well as the lining. Kind of just putting a bunch of the little pieces together that I have already made so I can get some work in progress photos, as well as kind of just admire what I've done so far. What I'm doing is I'm going through and testing this ear again. I have changed the base several times, so I'm using some tape to reinforce it just because I have attached and cut off new pieces several times. So I actually find out that I don't like the tip of the ear, so I'm going through and changing it a bit so that I can get it to be a slightly different angle than it was. This is the reason why I use paper patterns so much, just because I do change things quite often, especially like ear shapes. I don't want to cut something out of foam and then have to keep cutting a bunch of foam and wasting foam. I can just waste the paper. Now that the black part of the eye blanks are dry, I can start to paint the front of them again. So I'm going to go through here and I'm going to start to lay down my base layer of green. I have learned my lesson and I am putting this on way lighter, but still I do wind up with some holes now and then, and I will go through with my little needle and punch those holes out. I always take it and I put it in between me and the light so I can actually look through it and make sure that there aren't that many holes that are covered, and if there are any holes that are covered, I can make sure that I poke them out. I'm also testing to make sure that these eyes will actually fit in the eye blanks properly, and I am painting enough of the mesh that it covers it. So now that I'm waiting on that to dry, I have determined that I like the shape of this ear and I'm starting to cut it out in foam. Of course I need to cut out two, because there are two ears, so I'm going to cut the other one out by flipping the pattern over so that I have both ears. Now to test it, I'm going to start to pin them on and kind of get an idea of what they look like with the foam. Foam and paper do act differently, so you need to make sure that you do test fits with both the paper and the foam. I realized that the head strap is not perfectly symmetrical, and I don't want to be making the suit head with the assumption that the head strap is symmetrical on the top of the forehead. So what I'm doing here is I am taking some tape and I'm actually marking the perfect symmetrical line down the head. This is just to make sure that when I'm lining up the ears, I don't line them up evenly with the head strap, and then that will mean the ears are asymmetrical with each other. This is not something that is super picky because it really isn't that far off, but to me it is enough that I need a marker for it. So something that is just me being picky. Okay, so here I am fiddling with the angle of the ear. They're also really big, so they kind of droop onto the table, which doesn't give me an accurate depiction of the way that the ear would sit normally. So I am having the one ear droop off the side of the table just so that I can make sure that it hangs really good. So now that the paint is dry again, I'm going back and starting to paint the eyes some more. So by doing this, I am flipping back and forth between the paint and the head so that I can kind of maximize my time, so I don't have to wait on the eyes to completely dry, so I can flip between working on the suit head and painting the eyes so that I can have more time to do both. Alright, now I'm going to continue working on the ear. I'm also, while I am working with these ears, I've cut out a little circle of foam so that I can kind of signify where I want the horns on the top of the head to go. So this character does actually have two little horns on the top of his head. They're not very big, they're about the same size as the horns on his tail, so compared to his ears, they're very small. And I want to make sure that I have enough space on the top of his head so that I can have both of his little horns and his hair poof. So if I need to move the ears back or down a little bit more, I will know that by having this little foam circle for the placement of his horns. And now what I'm doing here is I am going through and marking the shape in which I want this EVA foam to be, so that I can have it to kind of reinforce the base of the ear, as well as kind of also go down halfway on the ear, so that it has kind of a reinforcement. The purpose of the EVA foam is just to kind of make sure the base of the ears don't wobble as much as kind of the tips of the ears, just because these things are so ridiculously big. I might wind up going through and adding some more reinforcement later on. For right now, I'm just using the EVA foam. I've cut this pattern piece out of the paper pattern of the ear just to make sure that I know it'll fit. I'm going through and kind of fitting them. The base of the ear is a little more wonky just because the EVA foam isn't as flexible as the green foam is. So I went through and make sure that it fit. But now the eye needs a little bit more painting, so I've switched back to the eye. So what I'm doing here is now I'm starting to layer on the other colors of the eye. Of course, eyes have multiple colors inside of them, different shades of the same green, so I'm going through and adding a little bit of a lighter green to the center just to give it a little more depth. Again, this is something you have to do in very thin layers to make sure you don't cover all of the holes on the eyes. So what I have done is I have taken out my fabric for the horns. Like I said earlier in this video, I have actually switched the fabric I am using from the light green lycra to this other slightly different shade of green fabric. I've preferred this shade of green way more than the lycra. So what I'm doing is I am taking that piece of fabric, I'm going to try and mix a paint so that I can match the color of this fabric as close as possible so that I can paint these eyes. The eyes are supposed to be the same color as this material, so I want it to be as close in color as possible. So I've cut a little sample. I'm going to put it right next to it so I can kind of mix a new color of paint. After mixing so much, I actually wind up getting something that is pretty close, and I start to paint the eyes that color. I actually prefer this color significantly to the brighter green that they used to be. The lighter, kind of more subdued green that I have now is way better looking than the brighter green that was before. So coming over and starting to paint some more layers onto these eyes. Again, poking out the little holes just so that I can still see out them. So I'm going through and double checking what kind of pupil shapes that drekkubus can have. So I'm making sure that they can have slitted eye shapes. So I want this character to actually have like rounded, ovally shaped pupils instead of perfectly round. I wanted them to be more elongated, kind of like a cat's. I'm going through and using this spare 3D eye blank so I can get the shape of the pupil perfectly center in the middle of the eye blanks without having to risk getting any paint on the painted eye blanks. I have these unpainted ones as kind of extras. So once I have added the pupil, I'm making sure that there aren't any holes left. So I'm going to go through and start to add some more details. Again, I'm going through and carefully layering on every detail to make sure that nothing clogs any of the holes. So now what I'm doing is I'm starting to add the little white dots to the eyes. These little white dots actually kind of act like eye shines, so this is where the light would come into a character's eyes. Normally, fursuit makers normally just add little white shines to the eyes to signify that this is light in the eye. Again, I want to make sure that there isn't any paint stuck in the hole, so I poke them out. Now that I'm waiting on the paint to dry, I am double checking the ears, and I'm double checking that I like the way they look. And I'm going through and cutting another circle for the other horn just so that I can kind of look at both of them at the same time and make sure that I like the placement of them. And I'm just fiddling with the placement of the eyelids, just kind of changing them up and seeing what I like better, trimming it a bit. I realize that I don't really like it that much. I have trimmed the eyes separate of each other. I want to make sure that I can start to kind of fill in some details that can't be done with the eyes still connected as one big piece. So I have trimmed them down the middle, and I'm starting to add details to them. So what I'm doing now is I am going through and creating the paper pattern for the horns. So this paper pattern is something that I actually used on the tail, so you will know that I made the tail after this point, and this paper pattern wound up becoming the spines for the tail as well as the horns on the top of the head, so they are the same shape and size. So now I'm going through and adding the kind of final touches to these eyes. I'm adding a little bit of darker shadows. It's kind of up to you on the order in which you want to paint these things. Typically, I would say paint the white part last, but I was kind of impatient and did the white part first for some reason, so oops. Oh well. Won't work for me, I guess. Alrighty, so unfortunately, off camera, I had to seal these eyes. Because I had to do this outside, I could not do this in my workroom because the sealant needed a open space. So I took these eyes outside and sprayed them down with a clear coat. It's really up to you on what brand you want to use for your clear coat. Just make sure you don't spray it too much that it gets to the point where it makes your eyes bleed. That's no good. But yeah, I had to do that outside. So unfortunately, you can't see that part, but it's just spraying a clear coat on it, and that's really all it is. Now what I'm doing is I am attaching the two pieces of the eyes together so that I can have the finished eye blanks. 3D printed sclera piece, and I am placing it on top of the mesh so I can get it placed correctly, and I'm going around the edge and just attaching this with hot glue, making sure none of the hot glue winds up on the inside of the eye, only on the outside. While I'm waiting on the hot glue for the eyes to dry, I'm fiddling with the placement of the ears and the horns stuff on the head. I'm not really making any progress with it. I'm mostly just looking at it and getting opinions on it so I can know if I want to change it or not. Again, this is just going through and reinforcing the eye mesh onto the back of the 3D printed eye blanks just to make sure that they are fitted correctly and won't come off. I'm going through and taking off the eyelids so that I can go ahead and start to fit the eyeballs into the head. Alright, so now what I'm doing is I am taking a pair of scissors and I'm cutting a small hole into the balaclava. So the purpose of this is so that I can take the balaclava and kind of bring it into the eye sockets so that I can have a really smooth, clean finish on the inside. Then I can go ahead and then install the eyes. So this will make sure that you actually have holes in the balaclava for where the person will see out of it into the eyes. I'm kind of cut a little star shape. What I'm doing is I'm taking each corner of the balaclava and I'm pulling it to the outside so I can start to glue the corners down to give it a seamless look on the inside. So now I have flipped the head upside down just so I can do the top part of the eyes and attach the balaclava there. It's a little easier when the head is upside down so that none of the glue drips from the top. Now I'm going through and attaching the ears to the head base while I'm waiting on the balaclava to dry to the outside of the head, by the way. So now everything is attached, I am going through and doing a test fit. I like the test fit, so what I'm doing is I am now starting to attach the base of the balaclava to the inside of the suit head. Now that the eyes are attached, I'm going to start to attach the forehead part on the inside where your forehead would be, and now I'm also going through and attaching it to the straps on the outside. While I'm waiting on that to dry, I am starting to fit the eyes into the head. Basically I just place the finished eyeballs into the head. I'm not gluing anything down right now, and then I am placing the black eyelids on top so I can get an idea of what these eyes look like. And that brings us to the end of part 1. So unfortunately, it takes a very long time to make a fursuit head, and that is just part 1 of several more parts to come for just this suit head. So of course, part 2 is going to be coming out relatively soon. If you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy all of the future videos as I finish this suit head. So if you are excited about that, go ahead and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell so that you get notified whenever I post a new video. And until next time, guys, remember, my name is Kata, and you are always welcome back in my kingdom.